On today's episode of Let's Talk Drones, we are continuing our NDAA compliant FPV build series by integrating our camera on board our build. And you may be wondering, why do you have two cameras? We're not running two cameras. I just struggled quite a bit getting the camera integrated into the build. That is why we've had a little bit of a setback in our schedule, along with some other obligations I've had that have pushed back my recording time. So I'm going to explain all of that to you and help you avoid the struggles that I went through. Let's not waste any more time. Let's talk drones. What's up? It's Chris the Drone Geek and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Drones. That's right, today we are continuing our NDAA FPV build series by integrating our camera. Now, I have two Foxeer Predator cameras here. I'm going to talk about why in just a few moments. For those of you that are just joining us for whatever reason, first of all, go back and watch the rest of the videos. Otherwise, you've just got a camera on a drone frame. And not even. But also, it gives you a lot of good information as to why we are where we are. You may have the question right now, this isn't an NDAA compliant camera, so doesn't this actually disqualify the whole build? And technically, you're right. It does disqualify the build, but for the sake of this series and keeping things as simple as possible, I'm moving forward with the Foxeer Predator with the hopes that I can replace it with the ORQA analog by Rotor Riot in the future once that finally gets to me. The folks over at ORQA were generous enough to send us their FPV camera, which is NDAA compliant. However, unfortunately, the body of that camera is just a little too large for the TBS Source 1 version 5. It won't fit into our build. Otherwise, I would have just used that camera and said, to heck with this, you can just use the ORQA camera. But for the frame that we have and the setup we have, I feel like this is the best option moving forward under the guise that and the understanding that we will be replacing this with an NDAA compliant FPV camera once it is available for the frame that we have. So just bear with me. I know that in the very most technical sense, this does disqualify the build as NDAA compliant, but the plan is to obviously bring that up to code once we're feasibly able to. Now that we've said all of that, why two cameras? Well, this is more of a visual representation of the struggle that I've had integrating this camera on board this build. I did not, in a million years, think this was going to be the component that I struggled with the most. I'd say you could probably argue that the burned out flight controllers was the biggest struggle, but I was rescued on that one. There was no one rescuing me on this one. I just had to figure it out. And I did, but after a lot of time and effort and thought. And I want to cut out all of that noise for you and tell you exactly what you need to do when dealing with this build out. Here's where the problem came in. I originally ordered this Foxeer Predator. It has a JST-GH connector on the back, and I did that because I thought, well, that will simplify the build for everybody. You'll just be able to go from JST connector to JST connector on the flight controller. What I didn't anticipate is that this would have a JST Molex, and the flight controller only accepts JST-GH connectors. Now, that's not inherently a problem. You can work your way around that, and eventually I did, but at the beginning, I struggled. And what I mean by struggled is I had the right idea. I created my own connector. I could have crimped wires that came with the camera that plugged into the back of the camera. I could have crimped them and added a JST-GH connector to the other end where I just crimped, but I'm not a great crimper. I need a lot more practice, and it was just something I didn't want to mess with in that moment because I just didn't have the right equipment, I didn't have the right tools, and gathering all of the supplies started to add up in terms of money, and I just couldn't get the right combination. So what I did instead is I used my soldering skills that I've developed to solder a JST Molex to a JST-GH connector. I don't know if that came into focus or not, but you get the picture. I did that because I felt that that would be the easiest, most straightforward way for me to move forward in this build. However, on the first attempt, I had issues with getting video feed out of the VTX. I was getting all of my telemetry the OSD was displaying, which told me that the VTX was doing its job, but I wasn't actually able to get video feed from the camera. It was just a blank gray space underneath the on-screen display with all of that information that comes through the VTX. So as I struggled with that and trying to understand why I was having issues with my video feed, I thought to myself, well, I can work around this. Instead of using some janky connector that I created, or what I thought was a janky connector, it turns out it actually was the answer, I went and I got this version of the Foxeer Predator 5. This is the pad version. So I thought to myself, well, I'll just solder directly from the camera to a JST-GH connector that goes into the flight controller. And I did that. But I had the same problem. It didn't solve my issues when it came to the video feed. I still had a gray video feed. And I sat there and I thought, what could the problem be? Well, that's when I figured out I just needed to monkey with it a little bit more. You see, when we look at a diagram of the ORQA F405 flight controller, when you look at the camera port, it's a 6-pin port. You've got a 5-volt, a ground, and video 1, followed by a 5-volt, a ground, and video 2. Now, naturally, when you're wiring this up, you would think to yourself, well, you're going to want to go with video 1, right? That's going to be the primary video source. Then you can switch to a video 2 if you need to, or if you want to incorporate that into your build. That's where I was wrong. Apparently, with my ORQA F405 flight controller, and this may be the case for all of them, but certainly with mine, it preferred video 2, because when I switched the pin input into that particular JST-GH connector from video 1 to video 2, solved all my problems. I had video feed almost immediately. So before I show you how to create one of these, which is going to be the ultimate solution for you, this is going to be the easiest, most straightforward in my opinion, let's talk about the pin outputs and how you need to wire your JST connectors, both on the Molex side that goes into the camera, as well as the JST-GH that goes into the flight controller. So when we look at the back of the Foxeer Predator 5 camera, you'll see that you have 5 labels underneath the JST Molex connector. These labels correspond with the pin that's above them. So each pin in that Molex connector is going to do a different operation of the camera. First, we have the VCC. This is our 5-volt in. This is going to be the power from the flight controller into the camera so that it can do its job. Followed by the ground, the GND. This is going to be the ground that goes with that 5-volt into the camera. Then we have our VID. This is our video out. This is going to send video information from the camera into the flight controller so that it can then be sent to the VTX and then transmitted back to your goggles. The final two, the OSD and the VSEN, they're not important unless you want to interface with the camera's OSD or on-screen display via the camera controller that comes with the Foxeer Predator 5. We are not going to do that in this series. I'm going to keep it as simple as possible, and I'm going to avoid complicating this connection as much as I possibly can. But if you wanted to, you could add a connection here that would allow you to interface with that controller that you get with the Foxeer Predator 5. Now that you know what each of these labels means and what function they serve with the actual operation of the camera, let's talk about how you're going to wire your JST Molex. So from left to right, you're going to run the red wire, your power wire, to the VCC port. You're going to run your black wire, your ground wire, into the GND port, and you're going to run your yellow wire into the VID port. You can make this whatever color you want. In fact, you can make any of these wires whatever color you want. Just make sure you remember what each of them means, because if you don't, you could plug this into the wrong port and you could cause some really serious issues, a la smoking your flight controller or any other component on board the drone via a short. So make sure you follow this direction as closely as possible. You can monkey with it in terms of color if you want to, but I like to stick with industry standard and keep it red for power, black for ground, and yellow for video. That's what we're going to do here. Now let's move on to the 6-pin JST-GH port on our flight controller. When we look at this as it sits on the drone, from left to right, you'll see that we have a VID2 pin, followed by a ground pin, followed by a 5-volt pin, followed by a VID1 pin, followed by a ground pin, and then finally followed by another 5-volt pin. As I said earlier, we want to avoid using VID1 because that seems to be the problem here with the ORQA F405 flight controller. It prefers VID2, at least it does for mine. So we're going to start with VID2 on your build, and we're going to see if that works right out of gate. So when we're wiring this up, we want our red wire to go to the 5-volt pin that's near the center of the 6-pin JST connector for the flight controller. We then want to put our black ground wire into the ground slot that's just to the left of the 5-volt connector we just put the red wire into. And finally, we want our yellow video out wire to go into the VID2 pin on our JST port. So that's going to go to the left of the ground that we just put into our JST-GH connector. When all is said and done, this is what each of your connections should look like when they're plugged into your flight controller and camera respectively. If they don't look like this, you want to go back to the drawing board and take a look to see how you can rewire your connectors to ensure that you have a successful interface with your camera and your flight controller. If you do all of these steps, you should get video when you plug your drone in. We'll get to that part here in just a few moments. If for some reason you don't get video and it's grayed out the way that I was describing in the beginning of this video, what my experience was, switch that video 2 to video 1 on your flight controller JST, and you should have success then. It just seems mine was configured to video 2, and I figure that's probably going to be the case with your flight controller as well. But if not, the best case scenario is you're going to want to just move that pin very quickly over to the vid 1 port, and it should provide you video at that point. Before we actually plug everything in to see if our connections work, let's go over to the workbench and I'll show you how you want to start putting together your very own JST conversion connector between the Molex and the JST GH. Like I said, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I already made my connector for my camera into my flight controller, and I'm not going to do it again because it's just enough of a pain in the neck that I don't think it's necessary to actually show you the creation of the connector. At this point in the series, I'm hoping that you followed along with some of the things that I've been doing, and you've done enough of your own research to figure out how to put together a JST connector. The one thing I am going to do though is show you an example here of how to solder these smaller gauged wires together, because that's going to help you in this step, specifically being able to integrate your Foxeer Predator 5 camera into your ORQA F405 flight controller. So again, this is just an example. Do not solder together two different colored wires. At least don't do it for the sake of best practices. You want the same color wire going from one connector to the other. We're just going to show you how to solder the wires together, and two different colors makes it easier for you to see what's going on with the actual soldering connection. So I've got my two pieces of wire here. I've got some solder here. I've got my soldering iron off camera, which fell asleep, so I'm going to wake that back up. And then I've got wire strippers here. So we're going to need all of these components in order to do this. The other thing you will need is heat shrink. You can use whatever color for this, it doesn't matter. And actually this is probably a little bit big, so it may not turn out the way I want it to, but I just want to show you the process for using heat shrink with this particular example. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut a little section of the heat shrink off so that I can use just the little section I'll need. What we're going to do first is we're going to take our wires and we're going to strip a length of the insulation off of the wires. I typically like to go with maybe like 1/4 of an inch. It might seem like a lot, but you do want plenty to work with here. If you don't have enough length, it makes it a lot harder to solder these together. So it's really hard to see. I'm just going to do my best to show you. You want about that much of the insulation taken off. That makes it really easy. Again, depending upon your skill level, you may be able to get away with less, you may need more, but I find that like 1/4 of an inch is pretty much a sweet spot for me. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to twist the wire in at that tightest bracket, and then I'm going to lift up, and that will strip the insulation away from the wire. So I have plenty of room to solder with. Now, there are a few different methods for this, and some are more reliable than others, but you can make all of them work. The first method is to actually intertwine the individual strands of hair, because if you look at these wires, and we just sort of, I'm going to use my fingernail to sort of break this up, if I can. If you sort of look there, it's hard to see, I know, because it's so small. It's a bunch of individual strands of wire that make up this smaller gauged wire for our JST connector. So you can see there's a little bit that juts out there. You can go ahead and unbraid all of these and then sort of interlace these wires together. The other way, and the way that I prefer, and it's not quite as efficient for conductivity, but it works, is you can take one end of the wire. For instance, I'm using the black end of the wire, and it sort of takes some fine precision, but you can get there. And then you just want to sort of wrap your way up the yellow wire end. And then you want to sort of crimp off the end of the black wire, or pinch it off so that it's flush against the yellow wire as best as you can. There is going to be obviously some solder that's added, which will, increase the bond or create a bond that is conductive, but you just want to do that, and you just want to make sure that all of the metal wire part is in the connection. Sorry, it's sort of hard to see because these parts are so small, but you can see there I've sort of wrapped the black wire around the yellow wire, and from here it gets really easy. Now, before we actually solder these together or put them in connectors, what you want to do is put your heat shrink around one of the ends so that you're able to slide it on and then heat shrink it after you've put the JST connectors on. You can do that before, you can do that after, but you definitely, just to save yourself the headache of having to take apart a JST connector, which isn't terribly hard, but it is just an added step, I like to just string my heat shrink on so that I can apply it directly after I solder. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to take our soldering iron, and you're going to want a finer tip. I have a pencil tip on here, something like this, or even smaller is fine for these wires. And on my heat resistant pad, I'm just going to press the soldering iron against the wire for a few moments to get it nice and hot. And just use your discretion on this. You'll know, especially when you go to incorporate the solder, when you've got enough heat on it. So from here, now that I've pressed that, and I'm just going to continue to press that, I will slowly incorporate my solder to my bond. And you'll see if it's hot enough, the solder will naturally bind to the wires themselves. You'll still get a little bit of a glob on your soldering iron, and it's okay if you have a little glob up the length of your wire. You don't want too much, but like a little bubble like that is fine. And actually, I would recommend it because you know now you've got a nice, strong bond between those two wires, and everything looks good there. The only other thing I would say is just test it. Once it's cooled off, pull on that. You don't want to pull real hard, but just enough tension that you know that they're not coming loose. So now that we've got that connection done, we can go ahead and bring our heat shrink down around the connection. And this is a necessary step. You want heat shrink around this bond. Some people might tell you that electrical tape is fine. I don't trust electrical tape for these types of connections. You've got to use heat shrink, in my opinion. So that's what we're going to use here in this example. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit this with some heat, so that heat shrink sinks in. I didn't do a great job of this. I'm going to move the heat shrink a little bit. I do have a little bit of leeway since it is a little bit larger than it needs to be. Ooh, that's hot. Yeah, there we go. I think that's good. I'm going to hold one end here so it doesn't roll around. We'll just continue to add the heat shrink until I am satisfied with the bond that we've got around it. Perfect. Okay. So that's good. And again, I used clear heat shrink here. It's probably not the right gauge heat shrink. I could probably have gone a size down, and I should have gone a size down, but it does provide us the protection we need, and it allows you to continue to see the bond. On my own connector, I actually have black heat shrink. I like the look of that better, and frankly, it's the right size and right gauge for this wire, so that's why I went with that. But once you've gotten to this step, now you can go ahead and add your JST connectors, which I don't even know if these are going to fit. I just pulled these JST connectors off to the side just by putting your little connector pin in one of the ports. This is not the right connector. Let me see if this one is. This one's too small. Yeah, so it appears... Oh, wait. No, there we go. So you just slide that in. It'll click. Oh, I've got it in backwards, of course. You slide that in. It'll click. Once you've finished that process on all three of your wires, you'll have a connector that looks something like this. Again, we talked about the problems that I had with the JST connectors earlier, and that's why I'm not showing you the JST connections here, is because this is not oriented correctly. This is one of my first connector attempts, and it is the one that gave me problems when it came to video 1 versus video 2 on the flight controller and not providing me a video feed. So you will have something that looks like this in the case of we've got a red, a black, and a yellow wire that are all connected together via JST connectors on either end. One's a Molex and one's a JST GH, and then you've got your 3 pieces of heat shrink around the wire wire covering those connectors to ensure that there's no shorting. So now that we've gotten through this part, it's just a matter of taking a look at the drone and whether or not we've got connectivity between the camera and the flight controller, and then out of the VTX to the goggles. We're going to take a look at that right now. Now that we have our connector completed, it's time to actually integrate the camera into the build. Just double checking our connections again. When we look at the Molex connector, you'll see here from left to right, we've got red, black, and yellow. That's our power, our ground, and our video. On the JST side, from left to right, we're starting in the middle of the connector. We've got red for our power, ground, and then yellow for our video into the flight controller. As long as your connector looks like that, you are set to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug our JST-GH into our flight controller there. If you wanna just double check yourself again, that's where the wires should be with relation to the pin input or output on the JST connector for the flight controller. Sorry, I vibrated the camera there. Now, we want to take our JST connector on our camera, and we want to plug it in just like this. So we'll just make sure everything's lined up, pop it in. Oop, the frame on the camera went a little bit. Pop it into place, and it should look like that. That's what you want. I'll talk about this little bracket in our next video where we actually get this thing ready for configuration and first flights. But for now, we are just testing to make sure that everything is wired correctly and that we have video set up correctly. So we will go ahead. Let me just put the camera in a way that when it turns on, you'll be able to see me and my bright, shiny face. There we go. Okay, the next part of this is going to be securing, this is gonna be hard to get into the camera frame, securing goggles. I've got my analog DJI set up here, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn those on and put them into AV in mode. That will allow me to see my analog feeds. So right now we have static snow. Once we've got this plugged in, we should be good in terms of the video coming through. Everything should work as proposed. Again, we're just double checking everything, make sure we don't have anything, and I have a couple of screws underneath my VTX that could have caused a problem. But we're gonna move those out of the way so they don't. You're just gonna make sure you don't have anything that could short out any components. Your smoke stopper will help you to eliminate those risks, but I just like to double and triple check everything. Same with underneath the camera here. I have some leftover solder from a previous soldering endeavor. Just gonna move that out of the way. Okay, now that we've made sure that everything is good in terms of no connectivity, no conductivity, no shorting, it's time to plug it in. So we're gonna go ahead and plug our smoke stopper into our drone first, and then we're going to plug our battery in. So now at this point, we should, it appears we do, have video out of the camera, and we do. Excellent. So this is exactly what we wanted. Awesome. I'm really excited about this, that this worked for you. Hopefully it did work for you. If not, like I said, if you're getting that gray screen that I was describing a little bit earlier, go back to the drawing board and plug your video wire from your camera into video 1. That may be the result that you need to settle with, but for those of you that have the flight controller oriented the way that I do, which could be all of you, but if not, most of you maybe, or some of you, video 2 is where you want to go. So everything works. We have video, which means that we are just another step closer to getting this thing airborne. Let's go back over to the desk. We'll wrap this video up.
I meant to show you more of the video feed from the goggles, but something happened where they stopped recording, and I thought they were recording, so I was just talking to nothing. I wasn't talking to nothing. I was talking into the microphone, and you got the feed of the workbench as well, so you get what I was going for there. But it really is that simple. We've gotten our next step out of the way. We've integrated our FPV camera, and we do have a video feed coming from it into the flight controller and out of the VTX. So we are one step closer
to finishing this build. In our next video, there's going to be a few things that we want to do just housekeeping wise. You can see here we've got an absolute mess with all the components hanging loose and free. We're going to batten down the hatches that way, get everything in place on the frame so we can close this thing up and move into our configuration process, as well as getting some of our settings set so that they're nice and convenient for everybody to use. And then after we've done all of that, we're going to take this thing and put it in the air. Maybe not all in one video, but the next video we're going to start that process. So look forward to mounting our camera, mounting our VTX, and closing up the drone and getting into some of the preliminary configuration settings to make sure that you get this thing working the way it needs to be working. What did you think of this video, and what do you think of the series so far? Let me know down in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It helps me out a lot. It helps get this video out into the algorithm to more viewers like yourself. If you really like this video, you love drone content, shot by drones, about drones, and for drone pilots, well, my friend, this is the channel for you. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and while you're at it, hit the bell icon too. You'll get a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris the Drone Geek, and I'm out of here. See ya. Yo, what you say? Steady screaming, YOLO rock.